Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the battlefield has been changing. Not slowly, not quietly, but in ways that have pushed this conflict into something unmistakably modern. You can hear it before you see it. A low buzzing in the sky, the sound of machines that do not carry pilots, machines that circle above trenches, roads, and damaged fields, machines that watch, machines that strike. This war, from the very beginning, has evolved into something increasingly high-tech. Across Ukraine, the sky has filled with drones, spy drones, attack drones, groups of them moving together in swarms. These unmanned aircraft have transformed the way both sides see the battlefield. They hover above front lines. They scan territory. They relay information back to operators sometimes miles away. And sometimes they carry weapons. These aerial systems have become one of the defining features of the war. The skies over Ukraine have become crowded with them. But the technology does not stop in the air. Because far from the sky, down along the Black Sea coastline, another type of machine has entered the fight: uncrewed boats. Fast, small, and remotely controlled. These naval drones have changed the balance at sea. They move across the surface of the water without crews on board. They travel toward their targets under remote control. And when they reach their destination, the effect can be dramatic. These uncrewed boats have been used by Ukraine against Russia's naval forces in the Black Sea, and their impact has been significant. Russian naval assets that once operated more freely in those waters have faced repeated attacks from these remotely controlled vessels. The result has been damage to elements of Russia's navy. Damage that has forced changes in how those ships move and where they operate. So when observers look at the war in Ukraine today, they often point to the same conclusion. Technology has reshaped the battlefield. The sky has drones. The sea has uncrewed boats. And now the ground is beginning to change as well, because Ukraine has begun moving forward with something new, something large in scale, something that signals yet another step in the technological transformation of this war. Ukraine has launched a massive program to deploy armed robots on land. These machines have a formal name within Ukrainian military terminology: uncrewed ground vehicles, UGVs. They're also described as ground robot systems, machines designed to move across terrain without a human driver sitting inside, machines that can carry equipment, machines that can operate in dangerous areas, machines that can approach positions where sending a soldier might be far more risky. The concept itself reflects a simple but powerful idea: remove the human operator from immediate danger. Send the machine forward instead. And this effort is not theoretical. These systems have already been used. They have already been tested under battlefield conditions. And according to Ukrainian military language describing them, these ground robot systems have already proven their worth. That phrase carries weight, because in war, usefulness is measured under the most demanding circumstances imaginable: front lines, hostile fire, unpredictable terrain, and constant surveillance from above. Yet these machines are being integrated into the battlefield environment, not as an experiment alone, but as part of a larger program, a program that aims to bring more of these ground robots into use. The progression is striking when you look at it in sequence. First, the air, drones filling the sky, then the sea, uncrewed boats challenging naval power, and now the land. Ground robots beginning to move across battlefields where soldiers once had to walk. You know, when conflicts change like this, the shift can feel almost quiet at first. Machines appearing here and there. A new system tested, another one deployed, and then suddenly, the pattern becomes clear. Technology is not just assisting the fight. Technology is becoming the fight. Ukraine's program to deploy armed robots on the ground reflects that exact moment in the evolution of this war. A moment where machines increasingly take on roles that once belonged entirely to people. And when you hear the phrase ground robot systems, it can sound almost clinical, almost technical. But behind that language lies a simple reality: machines moving through dangerous places so that human beings do not have to. There is a line that captures that moment quietly, almost softly. Sometimes the most powerful step forward is the one that keeps someone alive. And in a war defined by constant adaptation, Ukraine's move toward deploying armed robots on the ground marks another turning point. The sky changed, the sea changed. Now the ground is beginning to change too. And that transformation is only beginning to unfold. When people speak about modern warfare in Ukraine, the conversation often begins above the battlefield, with drones, small aircraft circling overhead, machines that observe, record, and sometimes strike. These devices have filled the skies since the earliest months of Russia's full-scale invasion. Their presence is constant. You hear the faint mechanical buzz long before you see them. Sometimes you never see them at all. They remain high enough to watch, but low enough to shape what happens on the ground. These aerial systems have become a defining feature of the conflict. But the technological transformation of this war has not remained confined to the air. It has also reached the sea. In the waters of the Black Sea, another kind of unmanned system has appeared: uncrewed boats, fast, remotely controlled vessels. They travel without sailors aboard. Instead, operators guide them from a distance, directing them across open water towards specific targets. And their presence has had consequences. These uncrewed boats have struck Russian naval assets operating in the Black Sea. In several cases, the results have been severe. Russian naval vessels have suffered damage. The impact has been large enough that the Russian Navy's activity in those waters has been affected. Ships that once moved with relative freedom now face a new threat. A threat that does not require a crew. A threat that can approach quietly across open water. And when you step back for a moment, you can see the pattern forming. Air, sea, machines operating without pilots or crews, machines directed from afar, machines that extend the reach of those controlling them. Now that pattern is expanding again, this time onto land. Ukraine has begun a massive program focused on deploying armed robots on the ground. In Ukrainian military terminology, these machines are known as uncrewed ground vehicles, UGVs. They're also described as ground robot systems. The language is technical, but the idea behind it is simple. A vehicle that moves across terrain without a person physically inside. A system that can travel through dangerous areas under remote control. A machine that can carry equipment or weapons while operators remain somewhere else. This approach represents a new layer in the technological environment of the war. Because until now, much of the attention has focused on the sky and the sea. But the battlefield itself, the ground where soldiers dig trenches and move between positions, remains the most dangerous environment of all. Every step forward can expose a person to observation. Every movement can draw fire. Every open field or damaged road carries risk. That is the environment these ground robots are meant to enter. Machines moving where humans would otherwise need to go. Machines crossing terrain that has become one of the most closely watched landscapes in the world. And while the program to deploy them is large, the systems themselves are not entirely new. Uncrewed ground vehicles have already appeared in the conflict. They have already been used. They have already operated in real battlefield conditions. And according to Ukrainian military language describing their performance, these ground robot systems have already proven their worth. That phrase is important because the battlefield does not allow for theoretical success. Only real results matter. Only systems that function under pressure remain in use. And yet these machines have continued to appear, which suggests something about how they have performed. Across the landscape of eastern and southern Ukraine, war has produced an environment that is constantly observed. Drones overhead, sensors, cameras, eyes everywhere. Every movement can be tracked. Every vehicle can be targeted. And in such an environment, technology becomes more than an advantage. It becomes a necessity. Ground robots represent one part of that adaptation. They can move forward without placing a human directly in harm's way. They can carry equipment. They can approach positions where danger is expected. And all of this takes place while the operator remains at a distance. A battlefield once defined by soldiers advancing on foot is now seeing machines take those first steps. You know, when you pause for a second and look at the sequence, it almost feels inevitable. First, the sky filled with drones, then the sea filled with uncrewed boats. And now the land is beginning to fill with ground robots, each step pushing the conflict further into the realm of unmanned systems, each step changing how operations unfold, each step altering what it means to move through a battlefield. Ukraine's program to deploy these systems on a large scale reflects the growing role of technology in this war, not as a side tool, but as a central part of how the conflict is fought. And while the machines themselves are made of metal, circuits, and remote controls, their purpose reflects something deeply human: reducing exposure, reducing risk, reducing the number of people who must step into the most dangerous places. There is a quiet line that echoes through moments like this, a line that feels almost whispered. When the machines move first, sometimes a life is spared. And that idea sits at the center of this new phase: uncrewed ground vehicles, ground robot systems, machines already tested in the conflict, machines that have already proven their worth, and machines that are now becoming part of a much larger program as Ukraine continues adapting to a war that has become one of the most technologically transformed conflicts of the modern era. Across the long front lines of Ukraine, the character of this war continues to change, not in sudden flashes alone, but through a steady introduction of new technology that alters how the battlefield functions. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, observers have watched the conflict evolve into something markedly different from many wars of the past. A conflict where machines now occupy roles that once belonged entirely to people. It began most visibly in the air. Drones quickly became one of the defining elements of the battlefield. Small aircraft, remotely operated, moving above cities, fields, trenches, and roads. Some carried cameras. Others carried explosives. Together, they created a constant presence overhead. The skies across Ukraine filled with them. Spy drones scanning the terrain. Attack drones striking positions. Groups of drones sometimes moving together, creating swarms that could monitor or target areas across the battlefield. Their presence transformed how both sides observe and react. What once required patrols or manned aircraft could now be done by a small machine controlled from a distance. But the transformation did not stop with the sky. The sea soon became another environment shaped by unmanned systems. Along the coastline and across the waters of the Black Sea, Ukraine introduced uncrewed boats. These vessels move across the surface of the water without sailors aboard. They are guided remotely, directed towards specific targets. And when they reach those targets, the results can be significant. These uncrewed boats have been used to strike Russian naval forces operating in the Black Sea. The effect has been damaging for elements of Russia's navy. Ships have suffered attacks. Operations that once unfolded more freely have faced new risks. The presence of these naval drones has forced adjustments in how Russian vessels move through those waters. So by this stage in the conflict, a clear pattern had emerged. In the sky, unmanned aircraft. At sea, uncrewed boats. Machines extending the reach of those operating them. Machines entering environments that would otherwise place people directly in harm's way. Now that same pattern is expanding again, this time across the land itself. Ukraine has embarked on a massive program aimed at deploying armed robots on the ground. These machines are known in Ukrainian military terminology as uncrewed ground vehicles, UGVs. They're also described as ground robot systems. The name reflects their purpose: vehicles capable of operating on the ground without a human driver inside. Machines designed to move through terrain while being controlled from elsewhere. The idea is straightforward. Instead of placing a person in the vehicle, the machine itself becomes the forward presence. It travels through dangerous areas. It carries equipment or weapons. It approaches positions that may be heavily watched or defended. And all of this happens while the operator remains at a distance. The concept aligns with the technological direction the conflict has already taken. Air systems without pilots, naval vessels without crews, and now land vehicles without drivers. But these ground robots are not simply experimental devices waiting for their first test. They have already appeared in the conflict. They have already operated under battlefield conditions. And according to Ukrainian military language describing their use, These ground robot systems have already proven their worth. That phrase, proven their worth, carries meaning that extends beyond technical performance. Because war places systems under extraordinary pressure. Conditions are unpredictable. Terrain is uneven. Signals can be disrupted. And the environment is constantly contested. For any machine to function reliably in such circumstances is significant. The presence of these ground robots reflects the same adaptation that has shaped other parts of the conflict. As risks increase, technology steps forward to absorb some of that danger. Machines move first. Humans follow when necessary. Across Ukraine's battlefields, where trenches cut through fields and damaged roads stretch between positions, the introduction of ground robots represents another stage in that evolution. A battlefield that once depended almost entirely on soldiers moving through terrain is now seeing machines take on some of those movements. Small vehicles rolling across the ground, controlled remotely, operating where observation from above is constant, operating where danger can appear suddenly. Ukraine's program to deploy these machines on a large scale signals that this approach is no longer isolated or limited. Instead, it is becoming part of the broader structure of the conflict. Air, sea, and land, each now touched by unmanned technology. Each now shaped by systems designed to operate without a person physically present inside them. When you pause and consider that sequence, the transformation becomes clear. A battlefield filled with buzzing drones overhead, remote-controlled vessels moving across open water, and now ground robots beginning to move through the terrain below. The war that began with tanks, artillery, and infantry has steadily incorporated machines that operate in new ways. Machines that extend reach. Machines that carry out tasks once done face-to-face with danger. And through it all, the central idea remains remarkably simple. Remove the person from the most exposed position. Let the machine go there instead. There is a quiet sentence that captures the meaning of that shift. It does not sound dramatic. It does not raise its voice, but it carries weight. Every step a machine takes forward is a step a human being does not have to. Ukraine's massive program to deploy armed robots on the ground now stands as the latest chapter in the technological evolution of this war. A conflict where drones fill the sky, where uncrewed boats challenge naval power in the Black Sea, and where ground robots, uncrewed ground vehicles, ground robot systems are already proving their place on the battlefield.